"She won't sit at my Thanksgiving table," Margaret announced, pointing toward the kitchen. Her son Paul said nothing. His wife Kayla left crying. 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Kayla walked back in with 4 children in matching pilgrim outfits. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma!" they screamed, running toward Margaret. The old woman froze. "Whose children are these?" Paul's fork clattered to the floor. Kayla smiled. "They're yours, Margaret. These are the grandchildren your son abandoned 4 years ago, the ones you'll never see again after today. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The turkey needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be perfect. Margaret Harrison stood in her kitchen on Thanksgiving morning talking to herself. She did this often now. The house was too quiet since Robert died. Talking filled the silence. She looked at the large turkey on the counter. It was 20 pounds, far too much food for 2 people. But Margaret always bought a 20-pound turkey. That was the tradition. The sun came through the kitchen window. The light was pale and cold. November in Atlanta felt empty. Margaret wore her bathrobe and slippers. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly. Even at 6 o'clock in the morning, Margaret Harrison looked proper and controlled. She walked through the dining room into the hallway. The grandfather clock ticked loudly. It was the only sound in the house. Margaret opened the curtains in the living room. Light filled the space. She checked every surface for dust. There was none. She paid a cleaning woman to come twice a week. The house was always perfect. Margaret stopped in front of the fireplace. Family photos lined the mantel. Her wedding photo from 1982. Paul as a baby. Paul graduating from Emory University. Paul in his business suit. Robert in his final year before the cancer took him. Margaret picked up Robert's photo and wiped the glass with her sleeve, even though it was already clean. "Paul is bringing someone today," she said to the photo. "Someone special. He sounded nervous on the phone." She put the photo back in its place. She walked upstairs to her bedroom. The bed was made perfectly. She had slept on only one side for 5 years. The other side stayed smooth and untouched. Margaret opened her closet. She selected a burgundy dress. It was proper for Thanksgiving. Conservative but elegant. She laid it on the bed next to her pearl necklace. Margaret showered and dressed carefully. She applied light makeup. She checked her appearance in the mirror 3 times. At 62 years old, she still maintained her dignity. Her posture was straight. Her expression was controlled. She looked like a woman who had never doubted herself in her entire life. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Margaret was back in the kitchen. She prepared the turkey with butter and herbs. She peeled potatoes. She trimmed green beans. She rolled out dough for pecan pie. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She had cooked this same meal for 30 years in this kitchen, the house filled with the smell of roasting meat and baking pastry. Margaret set the dining table at 10 o'clock. She took out her grandmother's china plates from the cabinet. Each plate was white, with a thin gold rim. She wiped every plate, even though they were already clean. She arranged them on the table with exact spacing, fork on the left, knife and spoon on the right, crystal water glass at the top of the knife. Margaret placed silver candlesticks in the center of the table. She put fresh white flowers in a vase. She stepped back and examined her work. The table looked like a photograph from a magazine. Perfect and cold and beautiful. "Paul will be impressed," Margaret said to the empty room. "Whoever he brings will see that we are a family of standards." Margaret thought about Paul's phone call from 2 days ago. His voice had sounded strange, tight, and nervous. "Whoever he brings will see that we are a family of standards," Margaret thought about Paul's phone call from 2 days ago. His voice had sounded strange, tight, and nervous. "Mom, I'm bringing someone special to Thanksgiving dinner," Paul had said. "A colleague from work?" Margaret had asked. "No, someone I want you to meet. Someone important." "A girlfriend?" Paul had hesitated. "Yes, someone like that." Margaret had felt a small flutter of hope. Paul was 36 years old. He should have been married by now. He should have given her grandchildren. Instead, he lived alone in a small apartment and worked too many hours. Margaret worried about him. She wanted him to settle down with a proper woman. Someone from a good Atlanta family. Someone who understood their world. The afternoon passed slowly. Margaret checked the turkey every 20 minutes. She mashed the potatoes with butter and cream. She cooked the green beans with bacon. She took the pecan pie from the oven at 3 o'clock. The crust was golden brown and perfect. At 3:30, Margaret changed into her burgundy dress. She fastened her pearl necklace. She put on low heels. She checked her reflection one final time. She looked elegant and dignified, the kind of woman who belonged in this beautiful house in Buckhead. And waited. The grandfather clock ticked. 3:45, 3:50, 3:55. At exactly 4 o'clock, Margaret heard a car in the driveway. And waited. The grandfather clock ticked. 3:45, 3:50, 3:55. At exactly 4 o'clock, Margaret heard a car in the driveway. Her heart beat faster. She stood up and smoothed her dress. She walked to the front door and waited. She heard car doors closing. She heard footsteps on the walkway. She heard voices. Paul's voice and a woman's voice. The doorbell rang. Margaret opened the door with a welcoming smile on her face. Paul stood on the front porch. He wore a dark suit and tie. His face was pale. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked terrified. Next to Paul stood a young black woman. She wore a simple blue dress. She was pretty. She looked nervous. She held a store-bought pumpkin pie in her hands. She smiled at Margaret hopefully. Margaret's welcoming smile froze on her face. "Mom," Paul said. His voice cracked. "This is Kayla, my wife." The word hit Margaret like cold water. Wife. The smile disappeared from her face completely. Her expression turned to stone. She looked at the young black woman standing on her porch. She looked at her son. She looked back at the woman. Her mind could not process what she was seeing. Stood in the doorway blocking the entrance. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply stared at Kayla with pure hatred in her eyes. Kayla's smile faded. She looked confused and frightened. She held out the pumpkin pie slightly as if offering a gift. Margaret ignored the gesture completely. She looked only at Paul, her son. Her disappointing, weak son who had just destroyed everything. Margaret stepped backward into the house. She turned and walked away without saying a single word. She left Paul and Kayla standing on the porch in the cold November air. Behind her, she heard them enter. She heard the door close. She heard their footsteps following her down the hallway. Margaret walked to the dining room. She sat down at the head of her perfect table. Her hands were shaking, but she hid them in her lap. Her mind raced with anger and disgust and disbelief. Her son had married a black woman. He had brought her here, to this house, on Thanksgiving. Her perfect day was ruined. Her family was ruined. Everything was ruined. Paul and Kayla appeared in the dining room doorway. Paul looked sick. Kayla looked scared. Margaret sat at the head of the table like a queen on a throne. She knew in this moment that she would never accept this woman into her family. Never. Paul entered the dining room first. His footsteps were quiet on the hardwood floor. Kayla followed behind him. She still held the pumpkin pie in her hands. Her eyes looked around the room. She saw the expensive furniture. She saw the paintings on the walls. She saw the crystal chandelier hanging above the table. Everything was perfect and cold. "Mom," Paul said quietly, "can Kayla put the pie in the kitchen?" Margaret did not answer. She did not look at him. She stared straight ahead at the wall. Her hands rested on the table in front of her. Her face showed nothing. Kayla stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrison," she said softly, "I'm so happy to finally meet you. Paul has told me so much about you." Silence. Kayla tried again. "I brought pumpkin pie. I know it's not homemade like yours probably is, but I thought, put it somewhere," Margaret said. Her voice was flat and cold. She did not look at Kayla when she spoke. Kayla's smile faded. She looked at Paul. Paul would not meet her eyes. He stared at the floor. I'll put it in the kitchen," Kayla said. Her voice was smaller now. She walked out of the dining room. Her footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Margaret and Paul sat in silence. Paul fidgeted with his tie. He opened his mouth twice, but no words came out. Margaret remained perfectly still. The only sound was the ticking clock in the hallway. Kayla returned a minute later. She had put the pie away. She stood in the doorway, uncertain what to do. Paul gestured to the chair on the left side of the table across from him. "You can sit here," Paul said. Kayla walked toward the chair. She pulled it out slightly. She started to sit down. "Stop," Margaret said. Kayla froze. She was halfway into the chair. She looked at Margaret with wide eyes. Margaret turned her head slowly. She looked directly at Kayla for the first time since opening the door. Her eyes were hard and cold. "Not there," Margaret said. Kayla stood up straight. She pushed the chair back in. "I'm sorry," she said. "Should I sit somewhere else?" "That table is for family," Margaret said. Each word came out slow and deliberate. "You belong in the kitchen." The room became completely silent. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Kayla's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like someone had slapped her across the face. "Mom," Paul said weakly, "Kayla is my wife. She is family." Margaret's head turned toward her son. Her eyes were like ice. "She is not my family," Margaret said. "I did not raise you to bring this kind of person into my home." "What kind of person?" Kayla asked. Her voice shook. Tears were forming in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Margaret stood up slowly. She was tall and thin. She looked down at Kayla with pure disgust on her face. "I will not have a mutt sitting at my table," Margaret said clearly. "This is a house with standards, with tradition. You do not belong here." The word hung in the air like poison. Mutt. Kayla's whole body started shaking. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She looked at Paul desperately. She waited for him to say something, to defend her, to tell his mother she was wrong. Paul sat frozen in his chair. His face was red. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at his plate. He looked at the wall. He looked anywhere except at Kayla. "Paul," Kayla whispered, "say something, please." Paul's lips trembled. A small sound came from his throat, but he said nothing. He did nothing. He sat there like a statue, while his mother called his wife a mutt. Kayla stood there for several long seconds. Tears poured down her face. Her whole body shook with shock and pain and betrayal. She looked at the man she married, the man who promised to love her, the man who was too weak to defend her from his mother's hatred. "You are not going to say anything," Kayla said. It was not a question. It was a realization. Her voice was filled with disbelief. "You are just going to sit there." Paul's hands shook on the table. A tear ran down his cheek, but he remained silent. Kayla looked at Margaret one more time. Margaret sat back down in her chair. She picked up her napkin and placed it in her lap. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just destroyed another human being with her words. Kayla turned and ran from the room. Her footsteps pounded down the hallway. She was crying hard now, sobbing. The sound echoed through the house. Paul flinched at each sob, but he did not move. He did not follow her. The front door opened. Cold air rushed into the house. The door slammed shut so hard the windows rattled. The sound was final and terrible. Kayla was gone. Margaret calmly picked up the serving spoon. She placed turkey on her plate. She added mashed potatoes. She added green beans. Her movements were slow and precise. She acted like nothing unusual had happened, like she had not just driven her daughter-in-law from her house with racist hatred. Paul sat motionless. His face was completely white now. Sweat formed on his forehead. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his fork. He stared at his empty plate. "Eat," Margaret said. She did not look at him. She cut her turkey into small, neat pieces. Paul picked up his fork with a trembling hand. He served himself food mechanically. Mashed potatoes, green beans. His movements were slow and robotic. He was not really present. He was somewhere else, somewhere far from this table, and this moment, and this terrible thing he had just allowed to happen. Margaret ate slowly. She chewed each bite carefully. She wiped her mouth with her napkin after every few bites. She was satisfied. She believed she had done the right thing. She believed she had protected her family's dignity. She believed she had maintained her standards. In her mind, Kayla was the problem. Kayla was the one who did not belong. Paul had made a terrible mistake marrying that woman. But Margaret had shown her the truth. She had shown her where she stood. Now perhaps Paul would understand. Now perhaps he would fix his mistake. Margaret looked at her son. He was eating, but not tasting. His eyes were empty. Tears dripped slowly down his face into his food. He did not wipe them away. He just kept eating like a machine. "She was not suitable," Margaret said calmly. "You can see that now. This is for the best." Paul said nothing. He took a bite of turkey. He chewed without tasting. He swallowed with difficulty. He reached for his wine glass. His hand shook so badly the wine almost spilled. He drank the entire glass in 3 large gulps. Margaret continued eating. The only sounds in the room were forks against plates and Paul's ragged breathing. The beautiful Thanksgiving table looked perfect. The food was perfectly cooked. The candles glowed warmly. But the room felt dead, cold, empty. Paul poured himself another glass of wine. His hands were shaking worse now. He drank half the glass immediately. He was trying to make himself numb, trying to escape from what he had just done, from what he had just allowed his mother to do to the woman he married. Margaret finished her turkey. She served herself more green beans. She ate with perfect manners and perfect posture. She felt no guilt. She felt no shame. She felt proud. She had defended her family. She had maintained her standards. In her world, she had done exactly the right thing. Paul drank his 3rd glass of wine. The room started to spin slightly. He put down his fork. He could not eat anymore. He felt sick. His stomach twisted with shame and wine and self-hatred. But still he sat there. He could not leave. He had never been able to leave. He was trapped by his mother's control and his own terrible weakness. The grandfather clock struck 5 o'clock in the hallway. The chimes rang through the silent house. Margaret and Paul sat at the perfect table eating their perfect meal. Outside, somewhere in the cold November evening, Keela was alone and crying. And neither of them went after her. The chimes faded into silence. Margaret reached for the bowl of mashed potatoes. She served herself a second helping. She passed the bowl to Paul without speaking. Paul stared at the bowl for several seconds before taking it. His hands shook as he spooned potatoes onto his plate. The food on Paul's plate was barely touched. He had moved it around with his fork, but eaten almost nothing. The wine was different. He had finished 3 glasses already. The alcohol made his head feel thick and heavy, but it did not make the shame go away. Paul set down the bowl of potatoes. He gripped the edge of the table. He started to push his chair back. Margaret's eyes moved toward him. She did not turn her head, just her eyes. Cold and watchful, Paul froze. He pulled his chair back in. He picked up his fork again. His breathing was fast and shallow. "The turkey is very good this year," Margaret said. Her tone was normal, conversational, as if nothing had happened. "I used fresh rosemary from the garden." Paul did not respond. He put a small bite of food in his mouth. He chewed mechanically. He could not taste anything. Margaret cut another piece of turkey. "I saw Linda Morrison at the garden club last week," she continued. "She asked about you. Her daughter Catherine is recently divorced. Very attractive woman. She works in real estate." Paul's fork clattered against his plate. He set it down. He reached for the wine bottle and poured himself another glass. His fourth. The bottle was nearly empty now. "You should meet her," Margaret said. "Catherine. She comes from a very good family. Her father was a judge." Paul drank half the glass of wine in one swallow. "I am married," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse. "That can be fixed," Margaret said simply. She ate a bite of green beans. "Mistakes can be corrected." Paul's eyes filled with tears again. He blinked them back. He drank more wine. The room was starting to spin. He gripped the table harder. Margaret finished her turkey. She set down her knife and fork. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at her son directly. "Paul," she said, "I raised you better than this. I sent you to the best schools. I gave you every advantage. And you married a—" "Don't," Paul interrupted. His voice was still quiet, but something in it had changed. "Please don't say it again." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Say what? The truth?" Paul closed his eyes. "She is my wife." "She is a mistake," Margaret said firmly, "and I will not pretend otherwise, not in my house." Paul opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The same weakness that kept him silent before kept him silent now. He looked down at his plate. He was crying again, silent tears that dripped onto the white china. Margaret stood up. She collected the dinner plates. She carried them to the kitchen. Paul sat alone at the table. He heard water running. He heard dishes clattering. His mother was cleaning up as if this were a normal Thanksgiving, as if she had not just destroyed his marriage, his life. Paul pushed his chair back again. This time he stood up. He swayed slightly. The wine made his legs unsteady. He took 2 steps toward the hallway, toward the front door, toward escape. "Where are you going?" Margaret's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Paul stopped. He did not turn around. "I should go," he said. "We haven't had dessert yet," Margaret said. "I made pecan pie, your favorite." "I'm not hungry." "Sit down, Paul." It was not a request. It was a command, the same command he had heard his entire life. Paul's shoulders slumped. He walked back to the table. He sat down heavily in his chair. He poured the last of the wine into his glass. Margaret returned with 2 dessert plates. Each had a large slice of pecan pie. She set one in front of Paul. She sat down with her own slice. She picked up her fork. "Eat," she said. Paul looked at the pie. His stomach turned, but he picked up his fork. He took a bite. It tasted like ashes in his mouth. They ate dessert in complete silence. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. The sound was loud in the quiet house. Margaret ate her pie slowly. She seemed to enjoy every bite. Paul forced himself to swallow each mouthful. He felt sick. Outside the dining room windows, the sun was setting. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple. Shadows filled the corners of the room. Margaret stood and switched on the chandelier above the table. The light was bright and harsh. It made Paul's head hurt worse. Margaret sat back down. She finished her pie. She set down her fork with precision. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin. "That was a lovely meal," she said. "Don't you think?" Paul stared at his mother. Really looked at her for the first time in years. He saw the hard line of her mouth, the cold judgment in her eyes, the complete absence of kindness or warmth or love. He saw her clearly. She was not protecting him. She had never been protecting him. She was protecting her pride, her worldview, her hatred. "How can you be like this?" Paul asked. His voice was thick from wine and tears. "How can you say those things to another human being?" Margaret's expression did not change. "I said what needed to be said." "You called her a mutt," Paul said. "You sent her to the kitchen like a servant." "I stated facts," Margaret replied calmly. "I maintained standards. This family has a reputation, a legacy. I will not allow it to be destroyed by your poor choices." "She is a person," Paul said. "A good person, a kind person. She is a nurse. She helps people. She is not one of us," Margaret interrupted. "And she never will be. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can move forward with your life properly." Paul slammed his hand on the table. The plates jumped. "What is wrong with you?" His voice was louder now. The wine was making him braver, or just more reckless. "What is wrong with me? Why did I just sit there? Why didn't I defend her?" "Because you know I'm right," Margaret said. She was unmoved by his outburst. "Deep down, you know you made a mistake." "The mistake was bringing her here," Paul said. Tears streamed down his face. "The mistake was thinking you could be a decent human being for one dinner. The mistake was thinking my mother actually loved me." Margaret's face hardened. "I do love you. That's why I'm protecting you." "You're not protecting me," Paul said. "You're destroying me. You've been destroying me my whole life." He stood up again. The chair fell backward and crashed to the floor. The sound was loud and violent. Paul swayed on his feet. He took a step toward the hallway. The doorbell rang. Both of them froze. Margaret frowned. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:30. She was not expecting anyone. All her friends and neighbors knew she hosted private family dinners on Thanksgiving. No one would interrupt. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. Insistent. "Who could that be?" Margaret said. She was annoyed at the interruption. Paul stood motionless. His face had gone pale again. Paler than before. He looked terrified. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Margaret stood up. She smoothed her dress. She walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor. Paul followed several steps behind. He was unsteady on his feet. He grabbed the wall for support. Margaret reached the front door. She opened it. Keela stood on the porch. Her face was calm now. Her eyes were dry. She stood straight and tall. She looked different than before, stronger. Behind her, the porch light cast long shadows across the front yard. Margaret's mouth opened to speak. Then she saw who else was there. 4 small children stood on the porch behind Keela. They were all about 4 years old, 2 boys and 2 girls. They wore matching costumes, black hats made of construction paper, white collars, brown vests, pilgrim costumes. Their skin was light brown. Their hair was curly and wild. They looked almost exactly alike. The children held hands in a row. They looked up at Margaret with wide brown eyes, curious and excited and innocent. Kayla stepped aside. The 4 children rushed forward past Margaret into the house. Their small voices echoed in the hallway. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma!" The 4 children ran past Margaret into the house. Their small feet pounded on the floor. They laughed and shouted with excitement. Their pilgrim hats bobbed up and down as they moved. Margaret stumbled backward. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Her mouth hung open. No sound came out. She could not speak. She could not think. She could only stare at the 4 children running through her hallway. One little boy stopped in front of the mirror. He looked at his reflection and adjusted his paper hat. "Look at me!" he shouted to the others. A little girl ran to the grandfather clock. She pressed her face against the glass. "The clock is so big," she said. The other 2 children had already reached the dining room. Margaret heard their voices echoing. "There's so much food," one child yelled. "Is that pie?" another asked. Paul stood frozen in the hallway. He pressed his back against the wall. His face was completely white. His eyes were huge. His whole body shook. He looked at the children. Then he looked at Kayla. Then back at the children. His breathing came in short gasps. Kayla stepped into the house. She closed the front door behind her quietly. She stood calm and straight. Her face showed no emotion. She looked at Margaret. "Aren't you going to invite us in properly?" Kayla asked. Her voice was steady. "We're family after all." Margaret's voice finally returned. "What is this?" she demanded. The words came out harsh and sharp. "Whose children are these?" The 2 children in the dining room ran back to the hallway. All 4 children stood together now. They looked at Margaret with bright, excited eyes. One little girl stepped forward. She wore a crooked paper hat and a big smile. "Hi, Grandma," the girl said. "I'm Jasmine. That's Jordan. That's Joshua. That's Jada. We're here for Thanksgiving." Margaret's legs felt weak. The hallway spun around her. She reached out and grabbed the wall. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't know these children." One of the boys tugged on his mother's dress. "Mama, can we eat the pie now?" he asked. "Not yet, Jordan," Kayla said gently. She touched the boy's head. "In a minute." Margaret's eyes fixed on the children's faces. She looked at each one carefully. The first boy had a familiar nose. The second boy had familiar ears. One girl had familiar eyes. The other girl had a familiar mouth. Margaret had seen these features before. In old family photos, in her mirror, in her son's face. "No," Margaret said. Her voice was barely audible. "No, this is not possible." The children ran past her into the dining room again. They gathered around the table looking at the leftover food. Their voices chattered excitedly. "Can we sit down?" one asked. "I want turkey," another said. "Look at the fancy plates," a third one shouted. Paul made a sound, a strange choked noise. Margaret turned to look at her son. He had slid down the wall into a sitting position on the floor. His knees were pulled up to his chest. His hands covered his face. He was making that sound again and again. a gasping sob. Margaret looked at Kayla. Kayla looked back at her steadily, waiting. "Whose children are these?" Margaret asked again. Her voice shook now. Kayla walked slowly into the hallway. She stood directly in front of Margaret. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "These are Paul's children," Kayla said. "Your grandchildren." Margaret's hand went to her chest. She could not breathe. "That's impossible. Paul doesn't have children. He told me he can't—" "He lied," Kayla interrupted. "He has 4 children. Their names are Jordan, Jasmine, Joshua, and Jada. They are quadruplets. They turned 4 years old last month on October 15th. Margaret turned to Paul. He was still on the floor with his face in his hands. His whole body shook with sobs. "Paul," Margaret said. Her voice was hard. "Look at me." Paul did not move. "Look at me," Margaret shouted. Paul slowly lifted his face. It was wet with tears. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked broken, destroyed. "Is this true?" Margaret demanded. "Are these your children?" Paul opened his mouth. No sound came out at first. Then he whispered so quietly Margaret almost could not hear. "Yes." The word hit Margaret like a physical blow. She staggered backward. Her hand reached for something to hold but found only air. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard. In the dining room, the children had climbed onto chairs. They sat at the table, looking at the food. One little girl picked up a fork. A boy reached for a roll. "Not yet," Kayla called to them. "Wait for Mama." The children set down what they were holding. They swung their legs under the table. They talked to each other in high, sweet voices. Margaret's mind raced. 4 children. 4 years old. That meant Paul had them 5 years ago. 5 years ago when he told her he broke up with a girlfriend. 5 years ago when he told her he was infertile. All lies. Everything was lies. "How?" Margaret asked. She looked at Kayla. "How is this possible?" Kayla's face remained calm, but her eyes were hard. 5 years ago, Paul and I met at a coffee shop on Peachtree Street, she said. We started dating. For 6 months, everything was good. He said he loved me. I believed him. Margaret listened. She could not speak, could not move. Then I got pregnant, Kayla continued. I went to the doctor for my first appointment. The doctor did an ultrasound. She found 4 heartbeats, quadruplets. I was scared but happy. I called Paul right away. I told him. Kayla's voice stayed steady, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain. Anger. Paul said we would figure it out together, Kayla said. He held me. He told me everything would be okay. That was on a Tuesday. By Friday, he was gone. Gone? Margaret repeated. Disappeared, Kayla said. He blocked my phone number. He moved out of his apartment. I went to his office. Security threw me out. I called and called. I went to every place I thought he might be. He was gone. He abandoned me when I was 3 months pregnant with 4 babies. Margaret looked at Paul. He had pulled his knees tighter to his chest. He rocked back and forth slightly. He looked like a child himself. A scared, guilty child. I don't believe you, Margaret said. But her voice had no strength. She did believe it. She could see the truth written on Paul's face. Believe what you want, Kayla said. The children exist. The DNA will prove it. But you can see it yourself if you just look at them. Margaret turned toward the dining room. The 4 children sat at her table. The table she told their mother she could not sit at. The children laughed and talked together. One boy poked his sister. She poked him back. Another girl sang a little song. The 4th child picked at a piece of turkey with small fingers. Margaret walked slowly into the dining room. She moved closer to the table. She looked at each child's face carefully. Jordan had Robert's strong nose, the same nose Robert's father had in the old photos. Jasmine had Margaret's mother's wide eyes and long lashes. Joshua had Paul's weak chin and thin mouth. Jada had Margaret's grandmother's small, delicate ears. These were Harrison children. Harrison blood. Harrison features passed down through generations. Margaret could not deny it. These were her grandchildren. The room tilted. Margaret grabbed the back of a chair. Her knees buckled. She fell heavily into the chair. She sat there breathing hard, staring at the 4 children. Her grandchildren. Her only grandchildren. The grandchildren she never knew existed. "I have 4 grandchildren," Margaret whispered. 4. Paul appeared in the dining room doorway. He held onto the frame to keep from falling. His face was blotchy and wet. He looked at the children, really looked at them. They looked back at him with curious eyes. "Are you our daddy?" Jada asked. Her voice was small and sweet. Paul's face crumpled. He made a choking sound. Fresh tears poured down his face. "Answer her," Kayla said. Her voice was sharp now. "Tell your daughter who you are." Paul tried to speak. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. He stood there crying silently. Margaret stared at her son. She saw him clearly now. He was weak, a coward. He had children, and he ran away from them. He abandoned them. He lied about them for 5 years. "Paul," Margaret said slowly, "what did you do?" Paul collapsed against the doorframe. He slid down to the floor again. His shoulders shook with violent sobs. Paul stayed on the floor, crying. The children watched him with confused faces. They had never seen a grown man cry before. Joshua climbed down from his chair. He walked slowly toward Paul. The little boy reached out his hand. "Don't cry, mister," Joshua said softly. "It's okay." Paul looked up at the child. His child. The boy had his eyes, the same shape, the same color. Paul reached out a shaking hand toward Joshua. The boy stepped back quickly and ran to his mother. "Mama, why is he crying?" Joshua asked. Kayla picked up her son. She held him on her hip. "Because he is sad," she said. "Very sad about choices he made." Margaret sat at the table frozen. She could not stop looking at the children. 4 grandchildren. She had prayed for grandchildren for years. She had dreamed about them, teaching them, spoiling them, watching them grow. And they existed. They had existed for 4 years, 4 years without her knowing. "I don't understand," Margaret said. Her voice sounded old and weak. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide them from me?" Kayla set Joshua down. She looked at Margaret with steady eyes. "I didn't hide them from you," Kayla said. "Your son did." Margaret turned to Paul. He was still on the floor. His face was buried in his hands again. "Paul," Margaret said, "explain this to me, now." Paul lifted his head slowly. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He took a deep breath and tried again. "I was afraid," Paul whispered. "Afraid of what?" Margaret demanded. "Of you," Paul said. He could not look at her. "I was afraid of what you would say, what you would do." "So you lied to me," Margaret said. "You told me you broke up with a girlfriend. You told me you were infertile. You told me you could never have children." "Yes," Paul whispered. "Why?" Paul finally looked at his mother. His eyes were empty, defeated. "Because Kayla is black," he said. "And I knew you would react exactly the way you reacted tonight. I knew you would hate her. I knew you would make me choose between you and her. And I was too weak to choose her." The words hung in the air. Heavy, true, terrible. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself. But she had no defense. Paul was right. She had proven him right the moment Kayla walked through her door. Kayla spoke again. Her voice was calm, but each word cut deep. "I had to quit my job when I was 5 months pregnant," she said. "The pregnancy was too risky. I was carrying 4 babies. My doctor put me on bed rest. I had no income." Paul had disappeared. "I moved in with my mother in her small apartment in College Park." Margaret listened. She felt cold inside. "My mother worked 2 jobs to support us," Kayla continued. "She was 60 years old. She worked at a grocery store during the day and cleaned offices at night. She did this so I could stay home and keep the babies safe." One of the girls at the table spoke up. "Grandma Ruth is the best," she said happily. "Yes, she is, Jasmine," Kayla said gently. Then she looked back at Margaret. "I went into labor at 34 weeks. Too early. I had an emergency C-section. The babies were so small. Jordan weighed 3 pounds. Jasmine weighed 2 pounds and 15 ounces. Joshua weighed 3 pounds and 2 ounces. Jada weighed 2 pounds and 12 ounces. Margaret's hand went to her throat. She imagined tiny babies in incubators, fighting to live. "They stayed in the NICU for 5 weeks, Kayla said. "I sat by their beds every single day. 4 tiny babies with tubes and wires attached to them. I watched them breathe. I prayed they would survive. I did this alone. Paul never came, never called, never sent money. Nothing." Paul sobbed harder. His whole body shook. "For 4 years, I have raised these children by myself," Kayla said. "My mother helps me. She is their only grandparent, the only family they know. We survive on my nurse's salary and my mother's social security. We live in a small apartment. The children share 1 bedroom, 2 bunk beds. They wear second-hand clothes, but they are loved. They are happy. They have never gone hungry. They have never been abandoned." Kayla's voice grew harder. "Until 2 weeks ago, I never told them about their father. I said he lived far away. I did not want them to know he threw them away. But then I saw something." "What did you see?" Margaret asked quietly. "I was at the grocery store with the children," Kayla said. "Paul was there. He was with a woman. They were shopping together, laughing. He looked happy. He looked at my children and did not recognize them, his own children. He walked right past us." Paul made a choking sound. "That's when I knew," Kayla said. "He had moved on with his life. He was pretending we never existed, pretending his children never existed. So I decided it was time for the truth." Margaret looked at Paul. "You saw them? You saw your children and didn't recognize them?" Paul could not speak. He just nodded. "I hired a private investigator," Kayla said. "It cost me $500 I did not have. But I needed to know. I needed to know if Paul had a family, if he had other children, if he had told his mother about us." "What did you find?" Margaret asked. "I found out he was married," Kayla said. "To me. He never divorced me. We are still legally married, which means when he brings other women here, he is committing adultery." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're married? Legally married?" "We got married at the courthouse 4 years and 7 months ago," Kayla said, "right after I told him I was pregnant. He said he wanted to do the right thing. 2 weeks later, he disappeared." Paul rocked back and forth on the floor. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry. I was so afraid. I didn't know what to do." "You were supposed to be a man," Kayla said. Her voice was sharp. "You were supposed to be a father. You were supposed to protect your family. Instead, you ran away like a coward." The children were quiet now. They sensed the anger in their mother's voice. Jada started to cry softly. Jordan put his arm around her. Margaret watched her grandchildren comfort each other. They were so small, so innocent. They had done nothing wrong. They were children who deserved to be loved, to be known, to have a family. I didn't know, Margaret said quietly. I swear, I didn't know they existed. Would it have mattered? Kayla asked. She looked directly at Margaret. If Paul had brought me here 5 years ago, pregnant with his children, would you have accepted me then? Or would you still have sent me to the kitchen? Would you still have called me a mutt? Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but she could not speak, because she knew the truth. 5 years ago, she would have reacted the same way. Maybe worse. She would have told Paul to leave, to get rid of the problem, to protect the family name. That's what I thought, Kayla said. She had seen the answer on Margaret's face. Margaret looked at the 4 children sitting at her table. Jordan with Robert's nose, Jasmine with her mother's eyes, Joshua with Paul's chin, Jada with her grandmother's ears. They carried Harrison blood, but they also carried Kayla's strength, Kayla's dignity. They were beautiful. Can I meet them properly? Margaret asked. Her voice was small, uncertain. Can I talk to them? Kayla looked at her children, then back at Margaret. Why? She asked. So you can hurt them the way you hurt me? So you can teach them to hate themselves? So you can tell them they are not good enough for your family? No, Margaret said quickly. I just want to know them. Please. They don't need you, Kayla said. They have me. They have Grandma Ruth. They have love, real love. Not the conditional love you give, not the love that comes with rules and judgment and hatred. Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes. For the first time since the children arrived, she understood what was happening. Kayla had not come here to reunite the family. She had come here to show Margaret what she had lost, to make her see the consequences of her beliefs. Margaret stared at Kayla. The understanding washed over her, cold and complete. This was not a reunion. This was a lesson. Kayla had brought the children here so Margaret could see them, meet them, know they existed, and then lose them forever. You planned this, Margaret said slowly. You brought them here on purpose, to show me. Yes, Kayla said simply. She did not apologize. She did not look away. Margaret's legs would not hold her anymore. She slid from the chair onto her knees on the floor. Her burgundy dress pooled around her. Her pearl necklace hung crooked. She looked up at the 4 children sitting at her table. I'm sorry, Margaret whispered. I am so sorry. The children looked at her with wide, curious eyes. They had never seen a grandmother on the floor before. Little Jada climbed down from her chair. She took a few steps toward Margaret. Her paper pilgrim hat sat crooked on her head. Her small face was serious. Are you really our grandma? Jada asked. Her voice was tiny and sweet. The question broke something inside Margaret, something that had been hard and frozen for many years. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She had not cried like this since Robert's funeral. She had not allowed herself to cry. But now, she could not stop. Yes, Margaret said. Her voice cracked. Yes, sweetheart. I am your grandmother. Jada took another step closer. She tilted her head and studied Margaret's face. Why are you crying? She asked. Because I made terrible mistakes, Margaret said. Because I didn't know about you. Because I should have known about you. Jada looked back at her mother. Mama, can I hug Grandma? She looked sad. Kayla's face was hard. She looked at Margaret on the floor. She looked at her daughter's innocent face. She shook her head slowly. No, baby, Kayla said gently. Come back here. Jada's small face fell. But she's sad, Mama. Come here, Jada, Kayla said more firmly. Jada walked back to her mother slowly. She looked over her shoulder at Margaret. Margaret reached out her hand toward the child, but Jada kept walking away. Margaret's hand dropped to the floor. The tears came harder now. She had grandchildren, 4 beautiful grandchildren, and they were standing right in front of her. But they were already lost. "Please," Margaret said to Kayla, "please let me know them. I will do anything. I will change. I promise I will change." "Change?" Kayla asked. Her voice was sharp. "You called me a mutt 1 hour ago. You told me I belong in the kitchen. You looked at me like I was dirt, and now you want to change because you found out I have your grandchildren." "I was wrong," Margaret said. "I know I was wrong." "You were not wrong," Kayla said. "You were cruel. You were hateful. You were racist. Those are not mistakes. Those are choices." Margaret covered her face with her hands. She sobbed into her palms. Her whole body shook. Everything she believed about herself was destroyed. She thought she was a good woman, a proper woman, a woman of standards and tradition. But she was none of those things. She was what Kayla said: cruel, hateful, racist. Paul finally pulled himself up from the floor. He held on to the doorframe. His face was swollen and red. He looked at his children sitting at the table. They looked back at him with uncertain eyes. They did not know him. He was a stranger. "Kayla," Paul said. His voice was broken and rough. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I was a coward. I know I failed you. I failed them. But please, please, give me a chance to make this right." Kayla turned to Paul. Her eyes were cold. "Make it right?" she repeated. "How do you make right 4 years of abandonment? How do you make right leaving me pregnant and alone? How do you make right your children growing up without a father?" "I don't know," Paul said, "but I want to try. I want to be their father. I want to help you. I will pay child support. I will do whatever you need." "I needed you 4 years ago," Kayla said. "I needed you when I was in the hospital having surgery. I needed you when the babies were in the NICU. I needed you when I had no money for diapers or formula. I needed you when I sat up all night alone with 4 crying babies. Where were you?" Paul's face crumpled. "I was here," he whispered, "in Atlanta, living my life, pretending none of it happened." "Exactly," Kayla said. "You chose comfort over responsibility. You chose your mother's approval over your own children. And now you think you can just show up and be daddy?" Paul took a step into the dining room. He moved toward the children. "I want to know you," he said to them. His voice shook. "I'm your father. I should have been there. I'm so sorry I wasn't." The children watched him approach. They pressed closer together on their chairs. They did not smile. They looked scared. Paul reached the table. He knelt down beside Jordan's chair. The little boy leaned away from him. Paul reached out his hand slowly. "Jordan," Paul said softly, "I'm your dad." Jordan shook his head. "No," the boy said. "My daddy is not here." The words hit Paul like a punch. His face twisted with pain. He reached for Jordan's hand. The boy pulled away quickly. He climbed off his chair and ran to his mother. He wrapped his arms around her legs. "I don't like him, Mama," Jordan said. "He's scary." Paul stayed on his knees by the empty chair. His hand was still outstretched. Empty. He looked at the other 3 children. They stared back at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Please," Paul said, "don't be afraid. I'm your father. I love you." Jasmine spoke up from her chair. "You don't know us," she said. Her small voice was matter-of-fact. "How can you love us if you don't know us?" Paul had no answer. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, because the child was right. He did not know them. He knew nothing about them. Their favorite foods, their favorite games, their fears, their dreams. Nothing. Kayla stepped between Paul and the table. She blocked his path to the children. "That's enough," she said firmly. "You're scaring them." I just want to talk to them, Paul said desperately. I just want them to know I'm sorry. They don't need your apology, Kayla said. They need a father who shows up, who keeps promises, who doesn't run away when things get hard. They need someone they can count on. You have never been that person. Paul stood up slowly. He looked at Kayla with desperate eyes. I can be that person now, he said. I can change. Just give me a chance. You need to become a completely different person, Kayla said. You need to find courage you have never had. You need to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. But that takes years. My children don't have years to wait for you to grow up. Paul turned to his mother. Margaret was still on her knees on the floor. Tears streamed down her face. She looked destroyed, broken. This is your fault, Paul said to Margaret. His voice was filled with pain and anger. You made me this way. You taught me to be afraid. You taught me that your approval was more important than anything else. You taught me to be a coward. Margaret looked up at her son. She saw the truth in his words. She had raised him to fear her judgment more than anything. She had taught him that appearances mattered more than love. She had made him weak, and now they were both paying the price. I'm sorry, Margaret whispered to Paul. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Paul said. He looked at his children. They huddled together near their mother, away from him, afraid of him. Look at them. They're terrified of me. My own children don't know me. They think I'm a stranger, a scary stranger. Joshua, the smallest boy, started to cry. The stress and tension had become too much. Jasmine put her arm around him. It's okay, Joshua, she said. We'll go home soon. The word home hit Margaret hard. Home meant away from here. Home meant away from her. These children had a home, and it did not include her. It would never include her. Margaret looked at the 4 children. She had spent years wanting grandchildren, praying for them, imagining holidays and birthdays, teaching them family traditions, telling them family stories. She had built dreams around grandchildren who did not exist yet, but they did exist. They had existed for 4 years, and she had missed everything. Their births, their first words, their first steps. 4 years of life she would never get back. 4 years that could have been filled with love and joy. And it was all her fault. Her racism had driven Kayla away tonight, but her racism had created the situation 5 years ago. Paul had been too afraid to tell her about Kayla because he knew how she would react. He knew she would reject Kayla because of her skin color. He knew his mother's love was conditional, based on rules, based on prejudice. So he had run, and 4 children grew up without a father because of it. Margaret understood now. She had destroyed her family, not protected it. Her beliefs had poisoned everything they touched. Her hatred had taken away the only grandchildren she would ever have. Margaret stayed on her knees. Her legs would not work anymore. She could not stand. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her. She looked at the 4 children standing near their mother. Her grandchildren. Her only grandchildren. Please don't take them away, Margaret said. Her voice was raw from crying. Please, I need to know them. They're all I have left. Kayla looked down at Margaret. There was no pity in her eyes, no softness. They are not here to fill your loneliness, Kayla said. They are not tools to make you feel better about yourself. They are children, human beings. They deserve better than what you offer. I can be better, Margaret said desperately. I promise I can be better. You had 62 years to be better, Kayla replied. You chose not to. You chose hatred instead. You chose pride instead. Those were your choices. Now you live with the consequences." Margaret reached out her hands toward the children. She was still on her knees. Her dress was dirty now. Her hair had fallen loose from its perfect style. She looked nothing like the dignified woman who had opened the door 2 hours ago. "Please," Margaret begged, "just give me one chance. Let me be their grandmother. I will love them. I promise I will love them." Keela gathered her children closer. "You don't know how to love people who don't look like you," she said. "You don't see us as human. You see us as less than. You proved that tonight." "I was wrong," Margaret said. She started crawling across the floor toward them. Her knees scraped against the hardwood. Her hands pressed flat against the cold floor. "I was so wrong. I see that now. Please, please, give me a chance to make this right." Paul watched his mother crawl across her own dining room floor. He had never seen her like this. She had always been so controlled, so proper, so certain of everything. Now she was on her hands and knees begging. Destroyed. "Kayla," Paul said quietly, "she's learned her lesson. Can't you see that? She understands now." Kayla turned to Paul. Her expression was hard. "She understands that actions have consequences," Kayla said. "That's not the same as understanding that racism is wrong. She's upset because she lost something she wants. Not because she hurt me, not because her beliefs are evil. She's crying for herself, not for us." Margaret reached the children. She was on her knees in front of them. She looked up at their small faces. Jordan stepped behind his mother's legs. Jasmine moved back. Joshua held his sister Jada's hand tight. "I'm your grandmother," Margaret said to them. Tears poured down her face. "I didn't know about you before, but I know now, and I want to love you. I want to be part of your lives." Little Jada looked at Margaret with serious eyes. "But you were mean to Mama," she said. "You made her cry." The words hit Margaret like knives. This child had seen everything. She had seen her mother be humiliated. She had seen her mother cry, and she would remember it forever. "I know," Margaret whispered. "I was very wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kayla touched each child's head gently. "Say goodbye to your grandmother," she told them. Her voice was soft but firm. "Are we leaving?" Jordan asked. "Yes, baby," Kayla said. "We're going home now." The 4 children looked at Margaret. They did not understand everything that had happened, but they understood they were supposed to say goodbye. They waved their small hands politely. "Bye, Grandma," they said together. Their voices were sweet and innocent. The sound of those voices saying goodbye destroyed Margaret. She reached out and touched Joshua's hand. His skin was warm and soft. His hand was so small. She had never held this hand before. She would never hold it again. "Please don't go," Margaret whispered. "Please." Kayla gently pulled Joshua's hand away from Margaret. She gathered all 4 children close to her. They pressed against their mother's sides and legs. They trusted her. They knew she would protect them. "We're leaving now," Kayla said. She looked at Margaret on the floor. "You have a beautiful house, Mrs. Harrison. Expensive furniture, fine china, a respected family name. Your family has been in Atlanta for generations. You have everything society says matters." Margaret looked up at Kayla through her tears. "But you are completely alone," Kayla continued. "You traded love for pride. You traded family for prejudice. You traded joy for hatred. I hope it was worth it." "It wasn't," Margaret cried. "It wasn't worth it. I see that now. Please, I'm begging you, don't take them from me." Kayla shook her head slowly. "I'm not taking them from you," she said. "You threw them away 5 years ago when you raised your son to be afraid of you. You threw them away tonight when you called me a mutt. You made your choices. These are the consequences." Margaret tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. She crawled forward on her knees, following, as Keela led the children toward the dining room door. Her pearl necklace dragged on the floor. Her dress was ruined. Her dignity was gone. "I'll do anything," Margaret begged. "Anything. Just name it. I'll give you money. I'll give you this house. I'll give you everything I have." Keela stopped in the doorway. She looked back at Margaret crawling on the floor. "I don't want your money," Keela said. "I don't want your house. I want my children to grow up knowing their worth, knowing they are valuable, knowing they are loved for who they are. I want them to have dignity. You can't buy that, and you can't give what you don't have." The children filed out of the dining room into the hallway. Margaret crawled after them. Paul stood frozen, watching the scene. He wanted to move, to do something, but his body would not obey. He was paralyzed by shame and alcohol and the weight of his failures. "Paul," Kayla said. She stopped and looked at him. "You asked what you need to do to be part of their lives." Paul's head lifted. A spark of hope appeared in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "Tell me. I'll do anything." "You need to become a different person," Kayla said. "Not just act different. Actually become different. You need to find courage you have never had. You need to learn to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. You need to learn that love means sacrifice, that being a parent means showing up even when it's hard." "I can do that," Paul said quickly. "I will do that." "That takes years," Kayla said. "Real change takes years. My children are 4 years old. They need a father now, not 5 years from now when you finally grow up. They needed a father 4 years ago. They needed a father when they were born. You weren't there." "I'm here now," Paul said desperately. "Being here for one night doesn't erase 4 years of absence," Kayla said. "It doesn't erase 4 years of them asking where their daddy was. 4 years of me telling them lies to protect them from the truth. The truth that their father abandoned them." Paul's face twisted with pain. "Can I see them sometimes?" he asked. "Can I visit them? Can I at least know them?" Kayla was quiet for a moment. She looked at her 4 children standing in the hallway. Then she looked back at Paul. "Maybe," she said. "Someday. If you prove you've changed. If you prove you can be the man they need you to be. But not now. Not until I know you won't hurt them. Not until I know you won't disappoint them the way you disappointed me." "How long?" Paul asked. "How long until I can see them?" "As long as it takes," Kayla said. "Maybe months, maybe years, maybe never. It depends on you." Margaret crawled into the hallway. She reached out toward Jada's small foot. The little girl stepped away. All 4 children watched their grandmother crawl toward them. They looked confused and scared. "Mama, why is Grandma on the floor?" Jasmine asked. "Because she's learning that actions have consequences," Kayla said. She took each child's hand. "Come on, babies. Time to go home." "Home to Grandma Ruth?" Jordan asked. "Yes," Kayla said. "Home to Grandma Ruth. She made sweet potato pie, just for you." The children's faces brightened at the mention of pie and their other grandmother. The grandmother who loved them, who had been there for them since birth, who had never abandoned them. Kayla led the children down the hallway toward the front door. Margaret crawled after them. She had lost all pride now, all dignity. She crawled on her hands and knees through her own house, begging. "Please don't do this," Margaret cried. "Please, they're my grandchildren, my blood, my family." Kayla stopped at the front door. She looked back one final time at Margaret on the floor, at Paul standing helpless in the hallway, at the ruins of the Harrison family. "Your son is a coward," Kayla said. Her voice was clear and strong. "He abandoned his children because he was afraid of you. He let you humiliate me because he was weak, because you raised him to care more about your approval than about truth or love. You taught him that appearances matter more than character. You taught him that some people are worth less than others. That is your real legacy. Not this house, not your family name, but the damage you caused, the lives you destroyed with your hatred." Margaret could not speak. She could only cry. Kayla opened the front door. Cold night air rushed into the house. The children walked out onto the porch. Their paper pilgrim hats bobbed as they moved. They looked back at the house one time. At the grandmother they would never know. At the father who was a stranger. Margaret crawled to the doorway. She could not go any further. She grabbed the door frame with both hands and pulled herself forward. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. Please, please, don't take my grandchildren away." But Kayla was already walking down the porch steps with the children. They held hands in a row, a mother and her 4 children, a complete family. They did not need Margaret. They did not need Paul. They had each other. And that was enough. Kayla walked down the front steps holding Jordan and Jasmine's hands. Joshua and Jada followed close behind. The porch light cast long shadows across the front yard. Margaret watched from the doorway. Her hands gripped the door frame so hard her knuckles turned white. "Wait," Margaret called out. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Please wait." Kayla did not stop. She did not turn around. She walked steadily toward her old car, parked at the curb. The children's small feet made soft sounds on the walkway. Margaret tried to stand. She pulled herself up using the doorframe. Her legs shook. She took one step onto the porch, then another. She held onto the porch railing to keep from falling. "Please," Margaret called again. "Just one more minute, please." Kayla reached her car. It was an old Honda Civic. The paint was faded. There was a dent in the back door. But it was clean. Well maintained. Kayla opened the back door. She began helping the children into their car seats. Margaret moved down the porch steps slowly. She held the railing tight. Each step was difficult. Her whole body felt heavy and weak. Paul appeared in the doorway behind her. He watched, but did not follow. Jordan climbed into his car seat first. Kayla buckled him in carefully. She checked the straps twice to make sure they were tight. Then Jasmine got in her seat. Then Joshua. Then Jada. Each child settled into their place. They knew the routine. They had done this hundreds of times with their mother. Margaret reached the walkway. She was halfway to the car now. She moved slowly, like she was walking through deep water. "Kayla," Margaret said, "please, just talk to me for one more minute." Kayla finished buckling Jada. She closed the back door. She turned and looked at Margaret standing on the walkway. Margaret looked destroyed. Her hair hung loose and messy. Her dress was dirty and wrinkled. Her face was red and swollen from crying. The proud, dignified woman from earlier was gone completely. "What do you want to say?" Kayla asked. Her voice was tired now. The anger had burned out. All that was left was exhaustion. Margaret took a few more steps closer. "I want to know them," she said. "I want to be their grandmother. Please, give me a chance." "You had your chance tonight," Kayla said. "You made your choice when you opened the door. You made your choice when you looked at me with hatred. You made your choice when you called me a mutt." "I was wrong," Margaret said. "I see that now." "You see it now, Because of what you lost, Kayla said. Not because you actually understand why it was wrong. You're not sorry for hurting me. You're sorry for losing your grandchildren. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but she stopped. Because Kayla was right. Margaret was crying for herself, for what she had lost, not for the pain she had caused. "What can I do?" Margaret asked. Her voice was small and desperate. "Tell me what to do to fix this." "There is no fixing this," Kayla said. "Some things can't be fixed. Some damage is permanent." Inside the car, the children pressed their faces against the windows. They watched their grandmother and their mother talk. Joshua started crying again. He was tired and confused. He wanted to go home. Kayla heard her son crying. "I need to go," she said. "My children are tired." "Will I ever see them again?" Margaret asked. "Please, just tell me. Will I ever get a chance?" Kayla looked at Margaret for a long moment. She saw an old woman, broken and alone. Part of Kayla felt satisfaction at Margaret's pain. Margaret had earned this suffering, but another part of Kayla just felt sad. Sad that hatred had destroyed a family. Sad that 4 children would grow up without half of their family. Sad that it had to be this way. "I don't know," Kayla said honestly. "Maybe someday, if you actually change, if you do the hard work of becoming a better person, but I won't hold my breath." "I will change," Margaret said. "I promise I will." "Promises are easy," Kayla said. "Change is hard. Real change means facing ugly truths about yourself. It means admitting your beliefs are wrong. It means letting go of everything you thought made you special. Can you do that?" Margaret did not answer. She did not know if she could. Kayla walked around to the driver's side of the car. She opened the door. She looked at Margaret one last time across the roof of the car. "Goodbye, Mrs. Harrison," Kayla said. "Goodbye," Margaret whispered. Kayla got in the car. She started the engine. The sound was loud in the quiet night. Margaret watched her buckle her seatbelt. Watched her adjust the rearview mirror. Watched her put the car in gear. The car pulled away from the curb slowly. Margaret stood on the walkway watching. The taillights glowed red in the darkness. Inside the car, she could see the shadows of 4 small heads. Her grandchildren, driving away from her. Maybe forever. Margaret raised her hand and waved. None of the children waved back. They could not see her in the darkness. Or maybe they were already looking forward, already thinking about home, about Grandma Ruth, about sweet potato pie, about the life they knew, the life that did not include Margaret. The car reached the end of the street. The brake lights flashed red. Then it turned the corner and disappeared. The sound of the engine faded. The street became quiet, empty. Margaret stood on the walkway staring at the empty street, the place where the car had been. The cold November air blew through her thin dress. She shivered, but she did not move. She could not move. Paul walked down from the porch slowly. He stood beside his mother. They both stared at the empty street. Neither spoke. They had no words for what had just happened. No words for what they had lost. "They're gone," Margaret finally whispered. "Yes," Paul said. "They were here, in my house, at my table, and now they're gone." "Yes." Margaret turned to look at her son. "This is our fault," she said. "Yours and mine. We did this." Paul nodded. Tears ran down his face. "I know. I destroyed everything," Margaret said. Her voice broke. "Everything I tried to protect. Everything I thought mattered. I destroyed it all." "We both did," Paul said. They stood together in the dark yard, mother and son, both broken, both alone. The house behind them was full of light, but it felt empty, dead. Margaret started walking back toward the house. Her steps were slow and unsteady. Paul followed her. They walked up the porch steps, into the house. Paul closed the front door behind them. The sound echoed through the halls, final, like a coffin closing. The house was silent now. No children's voices, no laughter, no life. Just silence. Margaret walked to the dining room. She stood in the doorway looking at the table. The plates were still there. The cold food. The burned-down candles. On the floor near the chairs were 4 small pilgrim hats. Black paper hats with cotton trim. The children had dropped them when they ran around, excited. Margaret walked to the hats. She bent down slowly. Her knees hurt. Her whole body hurt. She picked up one small hat. It smelled like baby shampoo, like crayons, like childhood. Margaret held the hat against her chest. She breathed in the smell. It was all she had left of her grandchildren. One small paper hat. She sat down on the floor, right there in her dining room. She held the hat and cried. Deep, painful sobs that came from somewhere dark inside her. She cried for what she had lost, for what she had thrown away, for the grandmother she would never be. Paul came into the dining room. He saw his mother sitting on the floor, holding a child's hat. He saw the other 3 hats lying nearby. He picked them up slowly, one by one. He held them in his hands. They were so small, made by small hands, worn by small heads. His children had worn these hats. His children, he did not know. Paul sat down on the floor beside his mother. They sat surrounded by cold food and dirty dishes and children's hats. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Time passing. Time that could not be recovered. "I was afraid of you," Paul said quietly. "My whole life I was afraid of you. Afraid of disappointing you. Afraid of your anger. Afraid of losing your approval." Margaret said nothing. She just held the small hat. "When Keela told me she was pregnant, I was happy at first," Paul continued. "For about 5 minutes I was happy. Then I thought about telling you, and I got scared. So scared I couldn't breathe. I knew you would be angry. I knew you would reject her, reject them. So I ran." "I made you afraid," Margaret said. Her voice was flat, empty. "Yes," Paul said. "I taught you that my approval mattered more than love." "Yes." "I taught you to be weak." "Yes." Margaret closed her eyes. What kind of mother does that? What kind of mother makes her child afraid to live his own life? "The same kind who calls someone a mutt," Paul said. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. "The same kind who sends someone to the kitchen based on their skin color. The same kind who values pride over love." Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at her son. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I thought I was maintaining standards, preserving our family." "You were maintaining hatred," Paul said. "You were preserving prejudice, and you destroyed our family in the process." They sat in silence. The house felt huge and empty around them, all the rooms with their expensive furniture and fine art and family photos. But no family, no love, no life. "We lost them," Margaret said. "We lost everything." "Yes," Paul said. "Can we get them back?" Paul shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe we lost them forever." Margaret held the small pilgrim hat tighter. She understood now. This was the price of hatred, the price of pride, the price of believing she was better than other people. She had paid with her family, with her grandchildren, with any chance of joy in her remaining years. She was 62 years old. She might live another 20 or 30 years, and she would spend them alone in this big empty house. knowing her grandchildren were out there somewhere growing up without her, learning and playing and becoming people she would never know. That was her legacy. Not the house, not the family name, not the traditions, but loss, emptiness, regret. Margaret and Paul sat on the dining room floor as the night grew later. The food grew colder. The candles burned out completely. And they understood too late that some mistakes destroy everything. The candles had burned out completely. Only darkness remained. Margaret and Paul sat on the floor in the dim light from the chandelier above. The clock struck 9 in the hallway. 3 hours had passed since Paul arrived. 3 hours that had destroyed everything. Paul finally stood up. His legs were unsteady. The wine and the shock made him dizzy. He put the 3 pilgrim hats on the dining table. He looked down at his mother, still sitting on the floor. "I need to go," Paul said. Margaret looked up at him. "Don't leave," she said. "Please, I can't be alone right now." "I can't stay here," Paul said. His voice was empty, hollow. "I can't look at you right now." "Paul," Margaret said, "we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what to do." "There's nothing to do," Paul said. "It's done. We lost them. There's no fixing it." He walked toward the hallway. Margaret struggled to stand. She grabbed the edge of the table and pulled herself up. Her whole body ached. She felt every one of her 62 years. "Wait," Margaret said. "At least help me clean up." Paul stopped in the doorway. He looked back at the table covered with cold food and dirty dishes. "Clean it up yourself," he said. "I'm done." "Paul, please." "I spent my whole life doing what you wanted," Paul said. His voice was getting louder now. Anger was breaking through the numbness. "I spent my whole life trying to please you, trying to make you proud. And what did it get me? I lost my wife. I lost my children. I lost everything that mattered because I was too afraid to stand up to you." "I was trying to help you," Margaret said. "I was trying to protect you from making a mistake." "Keila was not a mistake," Paul shouted. The words echoed through the house. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me. She was kind and smart and good. She loved me, and I threw her away because I was a coward. Because you taught me to be a coward." Margaret flinched at the words. "I taught you standards. I taught you—" "You taught me to hate," Paul interrupted. "You taught me that some people are worth less than others. You taught me that your approval was more important than my own happiness, than my own family." "That's not true," Margaret said, but her voice was weak. She could not defend herself. Not anymore. "It is true," Paul said. "Look at what happened tonight. Look at what you did. You called my wife a mutt. You sent her to the kitchen. You humiliated her in front of our children. And I sat there. I said nothing. Because that's what you taught me to do. To stay quiet. To choose you over everyone else." Margaret sat down in a dining chair. She could not stand anymore. "I didn't know about the children," she whispered. "If I had known—" "Would it have mattered?" Paul asked. He walked back into the dining room. He stood over his mother. "If I had told you 5 years ago that Keila was pregnant, what would you have done? Would you have welcomed her? Would you have been happy?" Margaret could not answer. She knew the truth. 5 years ago, she would have told Paul to leave Keila, to pay her to go away, to make the problem disappear. She would have done anything to prevent black grandchildren from entering the Harrison family. "That's what I thought," Paul said. He saw the answer on her face. "You would have done the same thing, maybe worse. So I ran. I was so afraid of you that I abandoned my pregnant wife. I abandoned 4 babies. I lived a lie for 5 years because I was too weak to face you." Paul picked up his wine glass from the table. It was empty. He threw it against the wall. The glass shattered. Pieces flew across the floor. The sound was violent and loud. Margaret jumped. "Paul, stop!" "I'm 36 years old," Paul said. His voice cracked. 36 years old, and I've never made one brave choice. Not one. Every decision I've made has been based on fear. Fear of you. Fear of disappointing you. Fear of losing your love. But you never loved me. Not really. You loved the idea of me. The son who followed your rules, who believed what you believed, who hated who you hated. "I do love you," Margaret said. Tears streamed down her face again. "You're my son. I've always loved you." "No," Paul said. "You loved the son you wanted me to be. Not the son I am, not the real me. The me who fell in love with a black woman. The me who has 4 mixed-race children. That me is an embarrassment to you. That me deserves to be humiliated at your Thanksgiving table." Paul walked to the dining room doorway again. He stopped and looked back at his mother one more time. "I have 4 children who don't know me," he said quietly. 4 children who are afraid of me, who see me as a stranger, a scary stranger. And that's on me. I did that. But you helped me do it. You taught me that being a Harrison was more important than being a good person, more important than being a good father, more important than being a man. "What are you saying?" Margaret asked. "I'm saying I don't want to be a Harrison anymore," Paul said. "I don't want to be the kind of person who abandons his children, who sits quietly while his mother spews hatred. I don't want to be you." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Margaret stood up from her chair. "Paul, please, don't say that. We can fix this. Together we can—" "There is no together," Paul said. "Not anymore. You made your choice tonight, and I made mine. I chose wrong. I chose you over them. And now I have to live with that. But I'm done choosing you. I'm done being afraid of you." "Where are you going?" Margaret asked desperately. "I don't know," Paul said. "Anywhere but here." He walked out of the dining room. Margaret heard his footsteps in the hallway. She heard the front door open. She ran after him. "Paul, wait! Don't leave like this!" But Paul was already down the porch steps. He walked to his car, parked in the driveway. Margaret stood in the doorway, the same doorway where she had watched her grandchildren leave an hour ago. "Please," Margaret called out. "I can't lose you too." Paul opened his car door. He looked back at his mother, standing in the lit doorway. She looked small and old and broken. "You already lost me," Paul said. "You lost me a long time ago. You just didn't notice." He got in his car and started the engine. Margaret walked onto the porch. She held the railing. She watched Paul back out of the driveway. She watched him drive away. His taillights disappeared down the street. The same street where Keela had driven away. The same empty street. Margaret stood alone on her porch. The November air was cold. She wore only her thin dress. She shivered, but did not go inside. She stared at the empty street, at the darkness, at the nothing that remained. Finally, she turned and walked back into her house. She closed the door behind her. She locked it. She stood in the hallway looking at her empty house, the house that had been full of noise and children and life just 1 hour ago. Now it was silent, dead. Margaret walked through each room, turning off lights. The living room, the hallway. She left the dining room for last. She stood in the doorway, looking at the ruined Thanksgiving dinner. The cold turkey, the congealed gravy, the dried-out vegetables, the uneaten pie. On the table sat 3 small pilgrim hats. On the floor where she had been sitting was the 4th hat. Margaret picked it up. She held all 4 hats in her hands. They were so light, made of paper and cotton and glue. made by small hands in a preschool classroom somewhere, made by her grandchildren who she would never know. Margaret turned off the dining room light. She walked upstairs to her bedroom. She did not change clothes. She did not wash her face. She just sat on the edge of her bed, holding the 4 pilgrim hats. She looked at the empty side of the bed where Robert used to sleep. "I destroyed everything," she whispered to the empty room. "Everything we built, everything that mattered. It's all gone." The house creaked and settled around her. The only sounds: no grandfather clock ticking, no voices, no life, just emptiness. Margaret set 3 of the hats on the dresser. She kept one, the smallest one, Jada's hat. She held it in her hands and looked at it, really looked at it. Someone had written a name on the inside brim in marker. Jada Harrison in careful letters. A teacher's handwriting, probably. Harrison. The children had her family name. They were Harrisons, her grandchildren, her blood, her legacy. And she had thrown them away. She had sent their mother to the kitchen and called her a mutt. She had destroyed any chance of knowing them, of being their grandmother, of being part of their lives. Margaret lay down on her bed, still wearing her dirty dress. She held the small hat against her chest. She stared at the ceiling. The room was dark, silent, empty. She thought about the children's faces, Jordan's serious brown eyes, Jasmine's bright smile, Joshua's nervous hands, Jada's tiny voice asking if she was really their grandma. "Yes," Margaret had said, "I am your grandmother." But she wasn't. Not really. A grandmother was someone who loved their grandchildren, who protected them, who made them feel safe and valued. Margaret had done none of those things. She had scared them, hurt them, driven them away. She wasn't a grandmother. She was just an old woman alone in a big empty house holding a child's paper hat. That was all she would ever be now. Margaret lay in bed all night. She did not sleep. She held the small pilgrim hat and stared at the dark ceiling. Outside her window, the sun rose slowly. Gray morning light filled the room. It was the day after Thanksgiving. Friday, November 26th. Margaret finally sat up. Her body ached. Her head pounded. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked at herself in the dresser mirror. She looked old, destroyed. Her hair was wild. Her dress was wrinkled and stained. Her face was pale and lined. She stood up slowly. She walked to the bathroom. She turned on the shower. She stood under the hot water for a long time, but the water could not wash away what she felt. The shame, the regret, the loss. Margaret dried off and dressed in clean clothes. Black pants, a gray sweater. She did not bother with makeup or jewelry. She went downstairs. The house was quiet, cold. She walked to the dining room. The mess from last night was still there. Cold food on the table. Broken glass on the floor. The smell of spoiled turkey filled the air. Margaret began cleaning. She scraped food into the trash. She washed dishes. She swept up the broken glass. She worked mechanically, not thinking, just moving. But every few minutes she would stop. She would remember something. A child's laugh, a small voice, and she would have to grip the counter and breathe until the pain passed. By noon, the kitchen was clean. Margaret had thrown away all the Thanksgiving food. She could not eat it, could not look at it. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She picked up her phone. She stared at it for several minutes. Then she called Paul. The phone rang 5 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Paul, it's your mother," Margaret said. Her voice was hoarse. "Please call me back. We need to talk. Please." She hung up. She waited. An hour passed. Paul did not call back. Margaret called again. Voicemail again. "Paul, please. I know you're angry. I understand. But please talk to me. Please." She hung up. She waited another hour. Nothing. Margaret tried calling 5 more times that day. Every call went to voicemail. Paul was not going to answer. The weekend passed slowly. Saturday. Sunday. Margaret sat in her house alone. She did not eat. She barely slept. She kept the 4 pilgrim hats on her nightstand. She looked at them constantly. She picked them up and held them. They were all she had. On Monday morning, Margaret got in her car. She drove to Paul's apartment in Midtown Atlanta. She'd been there a few times before. She knew which building, which floor. She parked and went up to his door. She knocked. "Paul," she called, "I know you're in there. Please open the door." Silence. She knocked again. Harder. "Paul, please. I need to talk to you." Nothing. Margaret looked down. She saw a shadow under the door. Someone was standing on the other side. Standing there, listening. Not opening the door. "Paul," Margaret said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please don't shut me out." The shadow moved away from the door. Footsteps walked away. Margaret heard a door close somewhere inside the apartment. He was there, but he would not see her. Margaret drove home crying. She had lost her son, just like she lost her grandchildren. Everyone was gone. 3 days later, Margaret started searching for Kayla. She opened her laptop. She searched for Kayla Thompson in Atlanta. There were many people with that name. She tried adding nurse to the search. She found some results, but none of them were her Kayla. Margaret called Grady Memorial Hospital. She asked for Kayla Thompson in the nursing department. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "We don't have anyone by that name working here currently." "She used to work there," Margaret said. "About 5 years ago. Do you have any records? Any way to contact her?" "I can't give out that information," the receptionist said. "Privacy policy." "Please," Margaret said. "It's very important. I need to find her." "I'm sorry. I can't help you." The call ended. Margaret tried other hospitals. Emory, Northside, Piedmont. None of them had Kayla working there. She had disappeared. Margaret drove through different neighborhoods in Atlanta. She drove through College Park, where Kayla said her mother lived. She looked for the old Honda Civic. She drove for hours, days. She never found it. She hired a private investigator, a man named James Carter. He charged her $300 a day. She did not care about the money. She just wanted to find her grandchildren. James Carter worked for a week. He came back with nothing. "Kayla Thompson is moved," he told Margaret in her living room. "She closed her bank account at Wells Fargo 2 weeks ago." She disconnected her phone number. Her last known address was an apartment in College Park, but the landlord says she moved out. Left no forwarding address. "Where did she go?" Margaret asked desperately. "I don't know," James said. "She covered her tracks well. She didn't want to be found." "Can you keep looking?" Margaret asked. "Please. I'll pay whatever it costs." James shook his head. "I can keep taking your money," he said, "but I won't find her. She's gone, and she wants to stay gone." After James left, Margaret sat alone in her living room. She understood now. Kayla had planned everything carefully. She had brought the children to show Margaret what she lost. Then she had disappeared. She had taken the children somewhere Margaret could never find them. It was justice. It was punishment. It was final. December arrived. Cold and gray. Margaret stopped leaving her house. She had nowhere to go, no one to see. She used to have friends, garden club friends, church friends. But they were not really friends. They were acquaintances, people she saw at events. None of them called to check on her. None of them cared. Paul still did not answer her calls. She tried every few days, always voicemail. She left messages. "Paul, it's almost Christmas. Please call me. Paul, I miss you. Please talk to me. Paul, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." He never responded. Margaret spent Christmas alone. She did not put up a tree. She did not cook a special meal. She sat in her living room and looked at old photo albums. Pictures of Paul as a baby, as a child, as a young man. She had so many pictures of Paul, but no pictures of her grandchildren. She would never have pictures of them. On Christmas night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table. She looked at the 4 pilgrim hats arranged in front of her. She had kept them on her nightstand for weeks, but tonight she brought them downstairs. She touched each one gently. Jordan's hat, Jasmine's hat, Joshua's hat, Jada's hat. 4 children she met for 20 minutes. 4 grandchildren who were strangers, who would always be strangers. Margaret thought about her life. 62 years. She had been born in this city, raised in this city, married in this city, had a child in this city, buried her husband in this city. And all those years she had believed certain things, believed them deeply, that her family was special, that her traditions mattered, that some people belonged in certain places and other people belonged in other places. She had believed these things without question, because her parents taught her, because everyone she knew believed the same things, because it was comfortable, easy, safe. But those beliefs had destroyed her life. They had driven away her daughter-in-law. They had cost her 4 grandchildren. They had turned her son against her. They had left her completely alone. Margaret picked up Jada's small hat, the one she had been holding since Thanksgiving night. She looked at the name written inside. Jada Harrison, in careful marker letters. Harrison, her family name, a name she had been so proud of, a name that meant nothing now. Because what good was a family name with no family? Margaret thought about Kayla's last words on Thanksgiving night. "You traded love for pride. I hope it was worth it." It was not worth it. It was not worth anything. Margaret had her house, her furniture, her china, her silver, all the things she valued, all the things that marked her as successful, as proper, as important. But she had no one, no family, no love, no joy, just objects in an empty house. Margaret stood up. She walked through her house one more time. The living room with its expensive paintings, the dining room with its crystal chandelier, the hallway with its family photos, all of it meaningless, all of it empty. She went upstairs to her bedroom. She placed the 4 pilgrim hats back on her nightstand. She changed into her nightgown. She lay down in her bed. She stared at the empty side where Robert used to sleep. "I ruined everything," she whispered to the darkness. "Everything we built, everything that mattered. It's all gone." She thought about her grandchildren. Jordan, Jasmine, Joshua, Jada. They were out there somewhere, growing, learning, playing, living their lives. They were 5 years old now, starting kindergarten probably, making friends, learning to read, experiencing all the small joys of childhood. And she would know none of it. She would miss all of it. Their first day of school, their lost teeth, their birthday parties, their Christmas mornings, everything a grandmother should share with her grandchildren. She would miss all of it, forever, because of her choices, her beliefs, her hatred. Margaret closed her eyes. She saw their faces, the way they looked at her on Thanksgiving night. Curious, innocent, hopeful. They had wanted to meet their grandmother. They had been excited, and she had destroyed that excitement. that hope, that innocent love. She would spend the rest of her life in this house, 20 years, maybe 30. She would wake up alone every morning, go to bed alone every night, eat meals alone, spend holidays alone. She would grow old alone, die alone, and no one would mourn her, because she had no one left. That was her legacy, not the Harrison family name, not the big house in Buckhead, not the traditions passed down through generations, but loneliness, emptiness, regret. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at the 4 pilgrim hats on her nightstand. In the moonlight coming through the window, they looked like small ghosts, shadows of children she would never know. She had learned the truth too late. Hatred has no winners, only victims, and she had become her own victim. Destroyed by the poison she carried inside her, the poison she thought was pride, was standards, was tradition, but was really just hatred. And now she would live with that knowledge for the rest of her life, alone in her beautiful house, a monument to everything she lost, a tomb for a family that no longer existed. Margaret turned over in bed. She faced the empty pillow beside her, and she understood that this was how she would spend every night for the rest of her life, looking at empty spaces, empty chairs, empty rooms, empty everything. This was the price, and she would pay it until the day she died. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen